In the summer of 1939, Warsaw held its breath. The city knew something terrible was coming. Helena Zawadzka stood in her library, surrounded by thousands of books, Polish history, Polish culture, centuries of memory packed into shelves and looms. Outside, German tanks were rolling closer. She understood what was happening. This wasn't just a military invasion, this was an attempt to erase an entire culture. The Nazi strategy was brutally simple: destroy the books, destroy the memory, eliminate the written record, and you eliminate identity. Poland would become a blank page they could rewrite however they wanted. But Helena had other plans. When the first German bombs fell on Warsaw in September, she wasn't running. While others were fleeing, she was organizing. Her library, Batury Municipal Library of Warsaw, held over 250,000 looms. Each book was a piece of Polish history. Each book was a target. The Germans weren't hiding their intentions. Their documented plans included systematic destruction of Polish intellectual resources. Universities would be closed, libraries burned, scholars arrested or killed, a complete cultural decapitation. Helena knew the stakes. These weren't just books. These were memories. These were proof of a civilization's existence. Her first move was radical. She started secretly moving books. Not just a few looms, entire collections. She created hidden storage spaces in basements, in church crypts, in abandoned buildings throughout Warsaw. She worked with a network of librarians, scholars and resistance fighters. Some called her crazy, moving thousands of books during a war, with German patrols everywhere. But Helena understood something deeper. These books were weapons, not to fight, but to preserve. The Nazi occupation was methodical. They didn't just want to conquer Poland, they wanted to eliminate any trace of Polish culture. Libraries were primary targets. The University of Warsaw's collection, over 700,000 looms, was systematically destroyed. Rare manuscripts burned, historical documents shredded. But not all books, not everywhere. Helena's network became a shadow library system. They would smuggle books past checkpoints, hide collections in the most unexpected places. A loom of Polish poetry might be tucked inside a sack of potatoes, medieval manuscripts wrapped in carpenter's rags. Her team included students, professors, even some sympathetic workers who had access to German administrative buildings. They created an underground system more complex than any military communication network. By 1942, they had saved tens of thousands of looms. Not just saved, protected, catalogued, preserved. The risks were enormous. Being caught meant certain death. The Germans didn't just punish individuals, they would execute entire families as a warning. But Helena and her team kept working. Their method wasn't just about hiding books. It was about creating multiple backup locations. If one cache was discovered, others remained safe. They understood the fundamental truth: information survives when it's distributed, not concentrated. Some looms were microfilmed, others were hand-copied. Entire libraries were recreated in fragments, in hidden notebooks, in memories passed between trusted individuals. This wasn't just preservation, this was resistance. The Germans knew something was happening. They would raid locations searching for hidden collections. But Helena's network was always one step ahead. A kind of intellectual guerrilla warfare, fought with card catalogues and careful planning. By the war's end, they had saved an estimated 60% of the municipal library's collection. In a city that was 85% destroyed, this was nothing short of a miracle. But the story wasn't just about saving books. It was about keeping a culture alive. When physical spaces were destroyed, these books became proof. Proof that Poland existed. Proof that its culture couldn't be erased. After the war, Helena would spend years recovering and reconstructing libraries, but the foundation was laid during those dark occupation years. Each saved book was an act of defiance. Her work wasn't just about preservation but about resurrection. The Germans believed they could rewrite history by destroying physical evidence, but Helena understood that culture lives in something more resilient than paper and ink. It lives in memory, in shared understanding, in the collective consciousness of the people. After the war, Helena began meticulously reconstructing what had been lost. She traveled across Poland, connecting with survivors, tracking down fragments of collections scattered during the occupation. Some books had been hidden in farmhouses, others smuggled out of the country, some survived in private collections preserved by families who risked everything to protect their cultural heritage. Her network from the occupation years became her reconstruction team, former students, professors, resistance members all united by the same mission. They understood that rebuilding libraries wasn't just about shelving books but about healing a traumatized national identity. The municipal library became her primary focus. Its walls had been reduced to rubble during the Warsaw Uprising, but its spirit remained unbroken. Helena worked with architects, historians, and bibliographers to create something more than a replacement. They were creating a memorial. Each recovered book told a story. Some were marked with bullet holes. Others had German administrative stamps. Some bore secret marginalia from resistance members who had hidden messages in their pages. These weren't just books anymore. They were artifacts of survival. International organizations began to take notice. UNESCO representatives visited, documenting her work. They recognized that what Helena was doing transcended simple library reconstruction. She was performing cultural archaeology, piecing together a narrative that the Nazis had tried to erase. Her methodology was extraordinary. She didn't just seek to replace lost looms but to understand the entire ecosystem of knowledge that had been disrupted. She tracked down publishing records, corresponded with international libraries, and created comprehensive catalogues of what had been lost and what could be recovered. Some books were beyond physical restoration. For these she initiated ambitious reprinting projects. Using surviving copies from abroad, scholars would meticulously reproduce texts that had been nearly eliminated. It was a form of intellectual resurrection, bringing knowledge back from the brink of extinction. The psychological impact of her work was profound. For many Poles, these recovered books represented more than just information. They were proof of continuity, evidence that their culture had survived the most systematic attempt at cultural annihilation in modern history. International scholars began studying her methods. How does one reconstruct knowledge after systematic destruction? Helena's approach became a model for cultural preservation in conflict zones around the world. Universities started collecting her documentation, her meticulous records showing how an entire network of intellectuals had protected knowledge during occupation became a critical historical resource. It wasn't just about books anymore, it was about understanding resistance, survival, and the power of collective memory. Polish schools began incorporating her story into history curriculums. Students learned not just about military resistance but about intellectual resistance. They understood that preservation of culture was itself a form of fighting back. The recovered libraries became pilgrimage sites. Scholars and students would visit, touching books that had survived impossibly difficult journeys. Each loom carried within it a story of survival, of hidden courage, of intellectual defiance. Helena never saw herself as a hero. When journalists would interview her, she would deflect praise, talking instead about her colleagues, about the network of resistance that had made survival possible. Her humility was itself a form of strength. By the 1960s, her work had transformed how Poland understood its own cultural history. The libraries she helped reconstruct weren't just repositories of books. They were living monuments to resilience, to the idea that knowledge cannot be permanently destroyed. Her legacy extended far beyond physical collections. She had demonstrated something fundamental about human culture, that true knowledge is not contained in a single location, but distributed through human connection, through memory, through an unbreakable commitment to remembering. The books saved during those dark years became more than historical artifacts. They were witnesses to a time of darkness, but also to an extraordinary human capacity for preservation, for hope, for continuity. In her later years, Helena reflected deeply on what had been accomplished. The recovered libraries were more than historical archives. They were living testaments to human resilience. Each restored book carried the whispers of those who had risked everything to preserve them. She often spoke to young researchers about the invisible threads connecting generations. Knowledge, she would say, is not a static thing. It breathes, it moves, it transforms through human hands and hearts. The books saved during the occupation were not just ink and paper, but living memories of a culture that refused to be silenced. As Poland transitioned through political changes in the decades following the war, Helena watched how her work continued to resonate. New generations discovered the stories embedded in those recovered looms. Young historians would trace the marginalia, the hidden notes, the subtle marks left by those who had protected these texts during the darkest times. Her own personal archives became a critical resource. Researchers would carefully examine her correspondence, her notes, her intricate catalogues that mapped the landscape of cultural survival. Each document revealed not just a method of preservation, but a profound philosophy of resistance. In quiet moments, Helena would sometimes wonder about the individual stories behind each saved book, who had hidden them, who had risked their life to transport a single loom. The books were more than objects, they were narratives of extraordinary human courage. International scholars continued to study her methodology. Her approach to cultural preservation became a model for understanding how knowledge survives under oppression. Museums began creating exhibitions that showcased not just the books but the human networks that protected them. As she aged, Helena became a living connection to a complex historical moment. Young students would visit her, listening to her soft-spoken accounts of those years. She never dramatized her experiences, instead offering nuanced reflections on human complexity during times of extreme challenge. Her health gradually declined, but her intellectual curiosity remained undiminished. She continued corresponding with researchers, offering insights, gently guiding new generations of historians and librarians. The network she had helped build continued to grow and evolve. When she passed away, the entire academic community mourned, but it was not a mourning of loss, but a celebration of an extraordinary life dedicated to preservation. Libraries across Poland and beyond held memorial events, displaying the recovered looms that represented her life's work. Her legacy was not about personal glory, but about demonstrating the profound resilience of human knowledge. She had shown that culture cannot be destroyed by force, that memory is a way to persist, to regenerate, to continue its quiet, powerful transmission across generations. The books she helped save became more than historical artifacts. They were bridges between past and present, silent witnesses to human determination. Each loom carried within it a story of survival, of intellectual courage, of an unbreakable commitment to remembering. In Helena's work was a testament to something larger than herself, enduring power of human connection, of memory, of the fundamental human drive to preserve and transmit knowledge. Her life reminded us that true resistance is not just about fighting, but about remembering, about keeping alive the stories that others would prefer to be forgotten. Her story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, human creativity and resilience can triumph. The recovered libraries stood as living monuments to this extraordinary truth, that knowledge, once kindled, can never truly be extinguished. The scholars who studied Helena's archives understood that her work transcended mere historical documentation. Her methodology represented a profound philosophical approach to cultural preservation. In academic conferences around the world, her strategies were discussed not just as historical tactics, but as living principles of intellectual resistance. Young researchers would trace her networks, understanding how complex human relationships could protect fragile cultural memories. Years after her passing, international archivists continued to discover hidden documents in her collections. Each new ding revealed another layer of her extraordinary network, connections between librarians, scholars, and resistance members who had risked everything to protect cultural knowledge. Her personal journals, which she had meticulously maintained throughout her life, became a critical resource for understanding the intricate dynamics of cultural survival during turbulent times. Researchers would spend months, sometimes years, carefully decoding her annotations, understanding the subtle strategies she had employed. The libraries she had helped recover became living institutions, not just repositories of books, but dynamic spaces of remembrance and regeneration. Young scholars would walk through these spaces, feeling the weight of history, understanding that each book represented not just knowledge but human resilience. Her story became more than a historical account. It transformed into a universal narrative about the power of human connection, about how intellectual courage could transform seemingly insurmountable challenges. In the quiet reading rooms of restored libraries across Eastern Europe, Helena's spirit seemed to linger, not as a ghostly presence, but as a subtle inspiration. The gentle rustling of pages, the careful handling of old manuscripts, the reverent silence, all carried echoes of her profound commitment. Future generations would continue her work, understanding that cultural preservation was not just about saving objects, but about maintaining living connections between past and present. Her legacy was a continuous thread, weaving through time, reminding humanity of its deepest capacities for remembrance and renewal. As sunlight filtered through restored library windows, illuminating carefully preserved manuscripts, her vision continued, quiet, persistent, unbreakable.